This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have an incredible guest. He's a physical therapist and board-certified orthopedic clinical specialist from the Fantasy Footballers. It's the one and only Matthew Betz. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited for this one. We were talking a little bit pre-recording, just about the busy day you have. So I just feel a little honored here to be a part of that, busy day. So thanks again for having me on.
Oh, of course. It's something we'll remember for quite some time. I appreciate you having you on here. Always wanted to get you on here. You have such a unique presence in the fantasy football space, and it's been fun to see it all unfold for you. And looking forward to kind of sharing your backstory on this episode. But for people, listeners, viewers that are unfamiliar with your work as an injury analyst and contributor at the Fantasy Footballers, what are your current roles over there?
Yeah, so I am the lead writer with the Fantasy Footballers, and I wear, it feels like 8 hats sometimes. That's just kind of a general term which they threw on me when I took the job. It was funny. I asked them, I was like, what should I put as my title? And they're like, guess we got to give you a title, don't we? Because when I joined them part-time, I was doing a little bit more of the DFS side plus injury analysis. And then there was this, idea that I had. I threw it to them and said, hey, is there any room for me to come on full-time and take on a bigger role? And I started doing a bunch of stuff behind the scenes on top of that, helping them prep for their shows, in addition to the DFS side of things and the injuries, of course, in season. And then last year, we added the Dynasty podcast into our rotation and, took that on as well. So I do a number of things with the Ballers, but I'd say the primary responsibilities are the injury coverage, the Dynasty podcast, and the DFS podcast are kind of my main 3 things.
I love it. Now, from a consumer perspective, what are your favorite features and tools and content that comes from the Fantasy Footballers, aside from the greatest podcasts ever been made in the history of sports podcasts?
Yeah, I would say I'm really proud of how the Ultimate Draft Kit has evolved over the last couple of years. And, as someone that was just a fan of the Ballers originally, when it came out, I got it and I was like, this is nice. It's good. It's got some good advice, but it wasn't really evolving. And then a year or 2 went by and it got even better. And another year went by, it got even better. And literally every year, our company asks ourselves now, how can we make this thing better than the year before? Which each year that goes by is kind of a tall task. It's tougher to do, but not really ever change the price. That's truly what we feel is right. Is just trying to make sure that Ultimate Draft Kit is the best it can be and make it for everyone. So I'm really proud of how that's evolved. One of the things that has gone into that is expanding what Kyle and I do, my co-host Kyle, in the DFS and best ball world, and really adding some tools to the Ultimate Draft Kit to get everyone ready for that. So it's been really fun to see it grow over the last several years.
Yeah, I think everybody has enjoyed the whole evolution of the Fantasy Footballers from when they first jumped in until now. But it's amazing how much actually does happen behind the scenes and with the writing and the content that comes off the website and obviously the DFS content in your guys' show. So it's so cool to see it all happen. Always a fan of the Fantasy Footballers. So it's great. Let's dive into your background a little bit more, learn a little bit more about your journey that led to this role with the Fantasy Footballers. When did you just discover a passion for sports? When did that all begin?
Honestly, my parents tell me it was when I was 2. They're like, literally as soon as you could walk, and really have somewhat coordination. Well, I would say that's a generous term at 2 years old. But as soon as you could walk and hold, a hockey stick or a football or whatever, that's all I did. So I guess it was from my dad, honestly. But as a kid, I was into video games and stuff, growing up, playing Madden, playing some NHL games, stuff like that. But when I wasn't in school or doing that, I was playing baseball, playing hockey, playing with my friends in the backyard, just a typical kid that loves sports. And, really, I would say that's kind of just inherently who I am. I love being athletic. I love being involved in sports, whether it's this or as a fan of my own teams. It's just been something that's been part of my life, literally as long as I can remember.
Who are your favorite teams and players growing up?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny how it all goes. But I grew up in the central Pennsylvania area, just outside of Hershey. So in the middle of the state, you're either a Pittsburgh Steelers fan or Pittsburgh sports in general, or Philly sports. But my dad growing up was a Cowboys fan. And, as a 5-year-old kid who doesn't know anything about football, it's like, I'll just like who my dad likes. So when I was really young, really little, I actually liked the 90s Cowboys team. So like Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, like that's kind of when I first started learning about the NFL. And then a couple of years went by, I kind of had a moment of like, why are we Cowboys fans? Like we don't even live anywhere close to Texas. My family has no ties to Texas, like kind of that thing. And I said, I'm going to start rooting for like the local team, which at the time was a little taboo with my dad. He's like, you can't be an Eagles fan. And fast forward now. So I'm a diehard Philly sports fan. Love the Phillies, Flyers, Eagles. I'm not a huge NBA guy, but I mean, when the Sixers are relevant, I'll root for the Sixers. But I would say those three big sports in Philly are kind of my passion.
Nice. Any other players outside of football that were like a big part of your life growing up?
Yeah, same thing. Those like 90s teams with the Flyers. So anyone that's a hockey fan will appreciate like the John LeClair, Eric Lindros, Eric Desjardins teams of those years. Man, I remember like being a kid and getting all the jerseys, buying like these, my parents bought me these like pretend helmets. I would have those with my hockey gloves on, in the kitchen playing hockey as a kid. Those teams with the Flyers are really kind of my fondest memories as a young kid, a fan of hockey.
I love it. How about your worst sports moment as a fan?
There's been a lot, but they've all kind of been recent, right? You think about the Eagles collapse to the Chiefs, not in this past year's Super Bowl, but the one prior. That one hurt for months. I'm not going to lie. That one hurt. And then I kind of think about the Phillies in the last 2 years, the collapse to which, with my company being in Arizona with Andy, Mike, and Jason, the collapse to the Diamondbacks was just horrible this past year. And then the year prior, losing in the World Series as well. So I think they've been more recent. And part of that, I think maybe is, as I get older in life and I start to appreciate more, like this isn't going to happen very often. When the Eagles lost the Super Bowl, I'll never forget this. The night of, I'm walking around all bummed, whatever. My wife's like, well, don't worry. Like they'll be back next year. And I was like, don't you dare. Like that is not how this works. We've been around this long enough to know that that's not how this works. You have to really appreciate when your teams get there. And I would say probably that Eagles loss is going to sting for quite a while.
Yeah, no, they hurt. They definitely hurt. And it doesn't help. You're telling me that the Ballers talk trash during that World Series?
Oh my
No
goodness.
way. No way.
They were just tagging me in Slack after every pitch, after every, hit for the D-backs. Yeah. And when they were down, when they had the lead in the series, I was like, yeah, whatever, like this is fine. We can lose a game, we'll be fine. And then all of a sudden, it's late in the next game, they're not winning. I'm like, oh my gosh, are we really about to do this? And they did.
Of course. And their stance on baseball, didn't matter, right? They just had to get you on that, huh?
Of course. That's how it works.
How about your favorite sports moment of all time?
Oh man. So there's a bunch. I would say like when I was a senior in high school, this was, I think 2010, if I remember correctly, for the year of which this happened. I know when I was a senior in high school, but for when this happened with the Flyers, when they were down 3-0 to the Bruins in the playoffs, that was a pretty fun moment for them to come back from 3-0. But then also when they were down 3-0 in game 7, like the actual score was 3-0 in the 7th game, and they came back from that to win the series. That was really fun. A lot of my friends from high school were super into it. We all watched the games together. But being down 3-0 in a series just almost never works, right? And to do it on that stage, I think was pretty fun.
That's awesome. How about your career path? Like what inspired you to dive into healthcare and physical therapy?
Yes, like I mentioned, I've always been into sports, always been active, always had an interest in helping people. And, honestly didn't want to go through the years and years and years of med school. So I was like, what's kind of a nice, happy in-between medium here? And that's kind of where I found PT. So did a little bit of shadowing in high school, shadowed a bit in college just to see what it's like, and found a couple of clinics I really enjoyed and thought maybe that could be for me. So yeah, I think my love for just, sports and being active combined with interest in helping people really led me towards that path.
Yeah, definitely fits with, with that type of mentality, right? You love sports, you love, athletics, you love being active, you want to help people. So help people be active, right?
Exactly. Yep. Pretty much.
So when along the line did you discover fantasy sports?
Yeah, I was a really bad player in college. When we my college buddies and I, we still have the same league together. When we started it, we all were like casual NFL fans. Like we enjoyed our teams, but like weren't really into fantasy. And so when we did it, it was like the classic, like pull up the draft board in August, figure out who everyone's recommended to draft those guys, and just like hope for the best. And we all, were that grid. But then as the years went by, it kind of became our outlet to stay connected as the years went by beyond college. And I would say like right when I was like a junior, senior in college, I really got into it. And then in grad school, we all just like latched onto this thing and absolutely loved it. So it's funny to see how far it's come for me, where, like I said, in high school and stuff, I like didn't care at all. In college, I cared a little. And like after college, it's like, now it's my passion, right? So it's funny to see how those things develop.
That's awesome. Yeah, for me, like, it was that, and I started before I started chiropractic school, but that's the home league that I created, that that people know of today with all the crazy, all the crazy stuff we do. It started in chiropractic school because I thought, let's all do this together. This is a great way to connect the people. Like you said, getting more serious about it in grad school. It was just such a great way to get people connected and stay, to give us an outlet, like you said. So I definitely can understand where you're coming from with that. So do you remember whose content you consumed early on, like when you were first kind of getting into fantasy?
Oh man. So this is probably like the classic, like Google search, and whatever popped up first, I was like, yep, that works for me, which was probably like ESPN or something like that off the top of my head. But I was never like a magazine guy. I never really like bought stuff early on. And then, I'll never forget when I found the Ballers. This was in my last year of grad school. I was working on my rotations. So I was just kind of out of the clinic for the afternoon. And I was like, I'm going to go for a run. It was like early August. I was like, it's time to get ready for this draft. It's coming up soon. And I did a search on iTunes, and as the SEO, geniuses that they are, of course, Fantasy Footballers popped up, and I was like, I'll give it a shot and see what it's like. So I went for a run, listened to the show, and I was like, oh man, I'm hooked. Like, this is it. So I would say they're the ones that I first like gravitated towards. But when I was, very casual, it was like everyone else, Googling and finding probably ESPN or CBS or someone like that.
Yeah. So when you first like really realized that you loved the game of fantasy, what was it that hooked you about it?
Oh man, I mean, there's literally nothing better than beating your friends and talking smack to your friends. Truthfully, that was kind of like what really got me into it. Was all my friends got into it at the same time, and so we were super competitive with each other. And as the years went by, like I played on a club team in college for soccer. And I've been an athlete, like I said, all my life. So like when that phase of life went away, I was like, I have to find something else to like fuel me to compete with my friends. And that was it. And so we were hooked and we were all into it. I would say that. But then on top of that, as the years have gone by, I've loved just the challenge of trying to predict the unpredictable, which, when you're in the content space of trying to create and help people do this, like Kyle and I always talk about this on our show in DFS. Like we're trying to predict what's going to happen for 8 hours on a Sunday with like a week of prep. That is so hard to do. We know that we're going to get so many things wrong. But now, like, imagine trying to predict the entire NFL season, which is kind of what you're doing when you're doing a fantasy draft. It's almost impossible. But when you find the hits and like guys that you like, and roster constructions that you like, and whatever else it is, and it works, like that's super rewarding. And I think if people find that and they find your content and they listen to you and they trust you, and it helps, that also goes a long way too. So I'd say there's like my own motivation to beat my friends, but then also my own motivation to help people, which is great.
Yeah, it's great. It's that league engagement, that the fun that you have in a league, and then also the challenge, right? The challenge of creating something special and being proud of the picks you made. I love that. So your primary home league, is that the college league still? Is that like the one league that you have to put the most into, or are there other leagues that out there that are really important to you as well?
Yeah, there's a couple. I play with a bunch of my high school buddies. It's like a classic redraft league, and it's kind of the same thing. Like people tune out till like July and then tune back in. So I feel like I have a pretty good leg up in that one. But the one that I do with my college buddies is actually a dynasty league. So we transformed it to that. I think our first year playing dynasty with the startup draft, I don't even know. Like Des Bryant was like one of the first picks. Like that kind of tells you where it started. So it's been going strong for quite a few years here. And that really like transition to Dynasty is, like you said, for league engagement has kept us all just interested in the NFL, 365 in reality, because we're all focused on this year's rookie class and the NFL draft and all those sort of things as well, a free agency. Whereas before it was like only August to January, and now we talk NFL all the time.
Yeah. Now, do you have any like just fun traditions in any of these leagues, like last place punishments or just live drafts or anything that's unique that just makes them extra special?
Yeah, this league that I was talking about with my college buddies, it's been one that we've taken, like I said, pretty seriously, and we committed to doing a destination draft every year. So for a while, I mean, it was super fun. We were down in like the DC area, out in San Diego, Texas. But as the years have gone on, sadly, not sadly, it's been great. But just things have been different. We now have kids, different requirements. So those drafts don't happen as often as they used to, sadly for me. But we still do a last place punishment where the champ gets to decide what that is every year. And we try to make them like pretty legit. Like I'll never forget when we were out in San Diego, for one, my buddy, we made him, he's Irish. So we made him dress up in a green like tracksuit, and we all went and played paintball together. We do like a 3 or 4 day trip. So it's like we do a couple activities and then like draft on like the second to last day. So we played paintball the morning of our draft. And we of course have him like covered in head to toe paint, also in a tracksuit. Also, it was like 80 degrees. So it was like super hot. We made him just like sweat it out wearing this thing. And we made him wear it to the bar where we did our draft at. So people are walking around like, who is this guy in this green tracksuit covered in paint? And of course, we all showered. So we all look normal. But we made him do that for the draft. So that was pretty fun.
I love that. Who's your biggest rival in a fantasy football league?
I think it's that guy I was talking about. His name's Andrew. Okay. So shout out to Andrew if you're listening. It's funny. He and I were super close in college. We played on the soccer team together. One of my good buddies. We keep in touch all year, outside of fantasy, just life and checking in and stuff like that. But it's funny, for the first 4 or 5 years, like he could not beat me in this league. And, he said it out. He's like, this year, dude, I'm taking you down. And I played him week 1 last year. And sadly, he did finally beat me. So he's got the leg up, I think, now. But we'll see. We'll see what's going on this year. He's a huge Packers fan. And I've got Josh Jacobs on this team. So I think he's a little worried about that matchup this year.
I love it. Rivalries, they never die. I love rivalries in fantasy football. It's so much fun to kind of fuel them and see how they evolve over the years. What are your favorite settings, formats in fantasy? I know you do stuff with DFS and Best Ball and Dynasty. Like, what are your favorite league settings and formats?
Yeah, I would say for Dynasty, I have really fallen in love with the Superflex format. When it first started, I was like, I'd played a one quarterback for so long. It's what I know. I don't really want to do anything different. But it does, I think, make the game a little bit more challenging. There's so much more strategy because, in fantasy, we really only care about like the top 12 quarterbacks mostly. You could argue the top like 8 are really the only difference makers, maybe even the top 5. But there's this idea in Superflex now where like the top 24 quarterbacks all have so much value, but like, did Mac Jones have any value last year? Did Bryce Young have any value last year? Right. So like there's this kind of this mismatch. If you can find, I think, the balance of like the elite quarterbacks plus this misconception that you have to prioritize your QB2. It has to be great. You have to get this Derek Carr in your lineup because he's a quarterback. I've actually found a bigger edge in those formats because I've deprioritized those spots a little bit. And so it just adds an extra layer, I think, of strategy to the game that I've really enjoyed. And the argument from people that do love Superflex that I've heard, and I kind of agree with, is like it's the NFL's most important position. And if you prioritize it and kind of build around it in fantasy, it just makes the game, I think, a little more challenging. So I've actually really enjoyed that format quite a bit.
I love it. I love just a variety of, when you have multiple leagues, to have a variety of different types of leagues. And Superflex, definitely change. It's definitely a unique change to fantasy for people that are just used to traditional redrafts. So I love it.
For sure.
I love that. I love that kind of stuff. So when did you start creating fantasy football content? I know that you're kind of part of that COVID boom, right? I can remember those days fondly. But when was it that you decided to dive in? Why did you decide to dive in? You're obviously on a career path in physical therapy. What was it that inspired you to get involved?
Yeah, so it was just before the COVID years of like maybe 2018, 2019. I was starting to work on the clinic, getting some experience with injuries, stuff like that. And at the time, Stephania Bell was kind of the only one really to have a voice in this space. And I was like, like there might be room for another couple people to help out or just provide some analysis and insight. So I actually reached out to, I don't know if you guys recall the Red Shirts Fantasy Football podcast, which was being started by Matt Okada and Kent Wyrock, two good friends in the space. And I was like, hey guys, like if you want a third, here's what I do. I'd be happy to help out. We were all writing for, at the time, a site called the Fantasy Authority. And they're like, yeah, sure, like let's do it. So we start this show together. We of course know nothing about podcasting or what a good product looks like or sounds like. So, we have these cheap mics. We're all doing it like after work hours at like 9:30 at night. So everyone's exhausted. But it was fun and it was a really good experience. From there, I did a little bit of work with Dynasty Nerds as a writer and just tried to just get my feet wet and just expose myself to different styles of content, whether it's writing, audio, video, meet a lot of people, connect with a lot of different people. And then really, I would say what helped me get kind of where I am today with the Ballers is when I started to get a little bit of experience, they put out the call for new writers. I applied and I presented myself as like, hey, this is what I do. This is my injury background. I noticed there's no one on your team that does this. Like, would this be helpful? I tricked them into saying yes, which was great. So they said yes. And so I wrote for them for, a handful of years. And then every year that's gone on since then, it's just been, hey, can you also do this thing? Or, hey, can you also add this podcast in your rotation? Or can you just add more and more and more? And it got to a point where I was like, basically working like 2 full-time jobs, essentially, with being in the clinic and then also doing that. And with life circumstances, my wife and I found out we were having kids. Like it was kind of the right time for me to take a step back from the clinic and inject myself a little bit more into the fantasy space. Just the flexibility has been good for our family and that sort of thing.
That's exciting. Yeah, I can remember all that. I mean, I remember the Red Shirts. I remember when you merged with Ball Blast. So many cool moments in this journey that I can recall. What were your experiences like working with Ball Blast, and obviously your time with Red Shirts and trying to grow something independent and unique? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was fun. It was a different challenge because, of course, with the platform I have now, the guys did a lot of that legwork way back when, right? So like people know the brand, they know the podcast, they like the podcast. Like that part's kind of done. Not that you're not always trying to get new listeners and engage with new people, but when you're just like a group of friends just doing this, we took it seriously, but it was mostly for fun. Like we weren't really making a lot of money, of course. We weren't getting like thousands and thousands of downloads, but there was something just like so rewarding about putting our heads together and trying to like create a fun product and doing it with people that you like that also share your passion. And so, I'll never forget this stuff too. Like growing through the years, my wife would be like, how would your show go tonight? Whatever. And be like, oh, it was awesome. We got 500 people to listen or, whatever. And it's so funny to like think back to that and be like, that was so rewarding because you have to create a name for yourself in this space. It's not just going to happen. But if you put in the time and the effort, and you put out good content that people learn your name, they learn your takes, your strategies, your advice, and they trust you, they'll come back, for more. And so once kind of, Kate and Michelle were able to get a little bit of their name out there, Okada landed a job with the NFL Network. It was like, oh, we could actually start doing something with this. And that really helped it grow quite a bit.
For sure. And talk to me a little bit about the injury and analyst niche in fantasy sports. Obviously, like you said, there wasn't a lot of people doing it. Obviously, Stephania is the GOAT. And then you decided to get that, the fantasy PT, right? Twitter profile. It was early on, like, and you saw a lot when people were kind of diving in, trying to, join that niche and create content. Talk to me a little bit about the challenges of doing injury analysis and what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's definitely challenging, like you said, just because in the clinic, when you see someone and you talk to their doctors, their surgeons, you talk to the person, you're with them 3 days a week, twice a week, depending on the situation. You really know exactly what's going on, and you can really tailor the rehab plan, know when to push it, when to pull back, how quickly they'll be back to whatever they're doing, whether it's baseball, soccer, hockey, football. You know those things. Well, I don't have any inside information. Like I'm not like an insider. I don't have access to what these guys are doing in the rehab room what they're doing in the off season, other than, when guys post like Instagram and Twitter workouts. I don't know that stuff. So I'm just using my knowledge to read the tea leaves quite a bit. So the challenge is like people, I think, still expect you to have the answer definitively of like, yes or no, black or white. Is this guy going to be ready for week 1 or whatever the week is? Or is he 100%? I mean, I can give you educated guesses, right? Based off of what's happened with their practice pattern, how long the injury's been going on, their injury history. But the challenge is, like I said, I'm not there with these guys every single day. So I've really tried to tailor my content and my takes on this type of stuff and be honest with people of like, I play fantasy and really it's a game of probability. That's how I play it. That's how I think we all should play it. And I think injury analysis is no different. So whenever I see stuff on social media, I hear other people talk about it from an injury perspective of this guy is definitively 100% in this week. It's like, you don't actually know that, right? That's actually false. You need to think about it more about what's the re-injury risk? How likely is it that they're 100%? That sort of thing. And really give a range, because being able to say that confidently without being with the player, being in the facility every day, truthfully, is kind of fool's gold. So I really caution people against that. And that's how I was like that early on. It was like, I need people to get my content, my clicks. Like I want them to know my name. So I'm going to give these crazy takes to just to get myself out there. But when you take a step back and realize that's not helping people, that's really kind of where I'm at with this whole thing.
In like a Stefania, I mean, she actually does get, great intel, right? Whereas it kind of gives her that advantage to just deliver good. But she also she does such a great job at how she, does this injury analysis stuff, and
she's awesome.
She's the GOAT. But I love your approach. It's been fun to see you do your thing over the years. What is your favorite aspect of what you do with the footballers?
I think my favorite thing of what I do is the DFS podcast. And the reason I love it so much is because, whenever like different podcasts and brands, whether it's in the fantasy space or not, when they kind of have these like offshoots of like different shows, oftentimes whoever's at the top of the company or whatever, like kind of dictate what the content is, usually, in my experience from what I've seen anyway. And with us, like with me and Kyle, they were like, this is your show, go with it, and people may not realize if they just found our show recently, but I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the podcast used to be hosted by Mike and then have different guests, each season. And at the time, it wasn't really like a Ballers feel to it. It was like Mike and then just other people that they hired to bring on. And there was a point where like the company almost kind of considered like, is this even worth it? Is this even really like our thing? Should we just move on and kind of do away with the DFS podcast? And they reached out to Kyle and me and they were like, hey, do you guys have any interest in taking this on? And, I jumped at the opportunity. I thought it'd be super fun. At the time, I knew Kyle, but I didn't really know him very well. And so I was like, this is perfect. Kyle and I are going to work hand in hand. We're going to make this podcast awesome. And I really feel proud about kind of how we've put our own stamp on it, but also making it feel like it's part of the Ballers family, like our comedy, kind of our terrible dad takes, our terrible dad jokes. We're just regular guys, right? Talking fantasy, talking NFL, and trying to help people win a little bit of money along the way. I really feel like we connect with people more than some of the other DFS podcasts, because those can be so intimidating. If you're just trying to get into it and you don't really know a lot about DFS or betting or gambling or best ball, it's like, man, this is like blowing my mind. How do I just, do this? And I think we do a good job of breaking down that barrier and making it a lot of fun.
I love it. So what are your long-term goals in this industry? And do you ever think you'll get back into doing PT?
Hard to say. I think when I took this on, it was like, I'll do this for a couple of years and see what happens. But, now my wife and I have twin daughters. They are a handful. They turn 2 in June. So it's very fun. We actually have our third girl on the way in August. So I'm still at the phase of life where flexibility for me is just paramount in work-life balance. And the Ballers have been incredible about that all along the way. So it's tough for me to really ever see a job in my future right now in the next 5 years where it's like, I leave the house at 8:30 and I come home at 5:30. That kind of thing for me probably can't work right now. Not to say that it won't in the future, but being able to deliver fantasy content and kind of work in this space has given me and my family so much flexibility that right now I don't have any goals to go back into the clinic in the short term, but never say never, in this space.
And it's, you've got a great home and great people. I mean, those guys they're just the best. And there's, for people that don't know Andy, Mike, and Jason, like they're just, no matter where I see them, no matter what the environment is, I mean, they're always Andy, Mike, and Jason. They're just the most authentic people. They built an incredible, product and company, and it's awesome to see great people like you joining that team. So I think you're in a great spot. I think it's a great situation for you, especially with all those girls at home. I love it.
Oh my goodness. It's exhausting.
Let's talk a little bit about the fantasy community. How much has the support of people in the industry, meant to you over the years, the friendships that you've made?
Yeah, it's been awesome. Like I said, when you're just kind of first starting to get into this, you don't want to look silly. You don't want to like put bad stuff out there. You want to kind of like stay in your lane, but also like you're trying to carve out a name for yourself. So it's really hard to do. But I would say 99% of the people I've interacted with over the years have been positive. And that's the truth about people that really get into this, is that sure, like any industry, once in a while you come across, not the best person in the world, but almost every single person I've talked to has been helpful in supporting what I do, whether it's, just asking advice of like, how did you get into the space? Asking advice for like, how do you write this article a certain way? What equipment should I be getting as a podcaster? Like just any of that stuff, people will answer you and be honest with you and help you. So I've had so much positivity come my way from the fantasy community. It's been incredible. And some of my best friends today in the space have come from it, with Okada, John Helmkamp, pretty close with him. Most people are familiar with. And then, Kyle right now, he and I talk for work daily, but like also in life, he and I are really close friends now that I don't think would ever have happened if we didn't have the show that we have together. So yeah, it's been pretty incredible.
I love hearing that. Any chance you're going to get to the Fantasy Football Expo sometime, one of these years?
I keep saying one of these years it's going to happen. I can tell you confidently this year is not the year. We've got that third little girl coming. My wife's due date is August 9th. So the timing is terrible for this year.
Yeah, for sure.
So I will be out this year.
I think that is the weekend of the Expo.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure my wife will understand, right? Like, hey, I would love to be there, but I've got other stuff going on.
Totally understandable. I love that. So when it comes to, the passion that we all share for football, I mean, that's something the fantasy football community always unites on. It's a great time of the year right now with the draft ahead of us. Are there any prospects this year that you're really excited to see where they land?
Yeah, it's been really fun to dive into these prospects in detail on our Dynasty show. And like I said, kind of years ago, I was super casual of like, oh, just see what the big boards say and like go from there. But as you develop a process and kind of get this analytical piece to it, there's a lot of guys that I'm super excited to see where they go. I am fascinated by where AD Mitchell goes, because he's a guy that I've really struggled with. Like I see what other people see when they're like, you put on the tape, you watch him play, this is a true X number one wide receiver. And I've other NFL draft nits have kind of, give him a little bit of a comp to the way he moves to like CeeDee Lamb. And you're like, oh my gosh, like this guy could be awesome. But also he barely did anything in college, right? Like his underlying metrics are quite terrible. A lot of people are saying he could be a better pro than college player. It's like, when has that ever failed, right? So like I see a lot of the yellow to red flags with this guy, but I'm also very intrigued. And the Bills just traded away Steph Diggs, and he's a pretty common mocked guy there. So he's a guy that I'm fascinated to see where he goes. It seems like he'll probably go round one. And if he goes to Buffalo, I might have to just change my stance on him a little bit.
For sure. Any other sleepers that you're excited to see where they land, like deeper sleepers?
Yeah, so one guy that I've actually liked quite a bit is Javon Baker out of UCF, wide receiver. He's kind of a guy that fits a lot of the stuff that we look for from an underlying like analytical profile. Yards per out run, targets per out run, that kind of stuff are all pretty good. Seems to be a guy that could sneak into like round 3 of the NFL draft. So he's not going to get great draft capital, obviously, but he's a guy that I know has some fans in the NFL draft community as well. So I'm interested to see where he goes. I like him quite a bit as a little bit of a deep sleeper here.
Nice. Any players in the NFL, like when it comes to like redraft season, that you're watching closely regarding into their injury reports, recent injuries that you're concerned about?
Yeah, this year there's quite a bit. I think that are kind of top of consideration with injury recovery. TJ Hawkinson's a guy right coming off the ACL and the MCL. late season. So week 16, I think, was his injury, and then didn't have the surgery till late January. He had that little bit of a delay. So he's a guy that probably lands on PUP, misses time. Nick Chubb is fascinating, right? Coming off of not only a gruesome left knee injury, but it's the same knee injury he had, not same knee injury, but same knee he injured at Georgia. So massive injury recovery implications there for those two players. And then you've got the Achilles guys, right? You've got Rodgers, you've got Kirk Cousins, which the Falcons have told us they are not concerned whatsoever with their financial commitment to Kirk Cousins coming off the Achilles. So just a bunch of guys, I think, that have huge implications as to kind of how the rest of their teammates or guys around them at ADP shift in terms of their value. So it's going to be a fun summer to track all those things.
What is your stance on Kirk Cousins? Like, I mean, that age, that type of injury. I mean, I don't like that personally. What do you think about those Achilles tears in a quarterback at that age? What do you expect this year?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about him is that he already provides essentially a zero in the running game, right? So like that concern is gone. If it was someone like Daniel Jones, he's coming from the ACL, but if it was him, it'd be like, well, this is a completely different story, a different situation. So I don't love it. I do see the path where it could go south. It could go sideways a little bit, but everything that I've seen is that he is on track, and they are not going to put him at risk in the summer, in preseason. They are going to kind of let him drop back and throw the ball, right? He's not going to run at all. So I think the effects of it will be pretty limited as far as what you'll be able to see on the field and as far as fantasy. So I think all in all, of course, if we were picking, kind of the situation, I would love for him not to have this going on, but I think he'll have enough time, and the position he plays won't affect him as much as it would otherwise.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how it all plays out for him, because it's true. If he has protection and he can do what he does, I mean, there's weapons there that it's exciting to see. Hopefully, people will finally get to see some of these weapons unleashed, with London and Pitts and
Are you in on Pitts this year again?
I mean, I'm not.
You're not. Okay.
I'm not.
I don't know where I land.
I'm not. But I mean, I'll see how it plays out. But I've gone too much into that well in the past. I've been burnt. Same. So if he's there, it's one of those things. It all comes down to the value, and if he's sitting there deeper into the draft than he should be, then I'll dabble. But he's definitely not a guy I'm jumping ADP for. Is there anybody that you are excited to like that, right now that like, these are my guys, I know I'm going to be, overly eager to draft next season and jump ADP with?
Yeah, there's a handful of guys that I was kind of considering with this question, and I'm really fascinated to see what happens with guys like Nico Collins and Tank Dell after the Stephon Diggs trade, which, Stephon Diggs is obviously better than Noah Brown, who was being trotted out there as the wide receiver 3 last year for Houston. That said, you look at the situation and all the underlying metrics for Tank and Nico were off the charts last year. You've got a quarterback in CJ Stroud who presumably should take a step forward in year 2. They bring back Bobby Slowick as the OC. It all makes sense. And if you think Diggs is on the decline and his best football is behind him, I think there's opportunity for one of those two guys. I don't know which one I really feel strongly about, but one of those two guys to outperform their ADP, because I feel like as the summer goes on, you're going to see Nico and Tank start to fall a little bit with the Diggs trade. In best ball, they're still going decently high because those rooms are so wide receiver heavy. But like in your home league, and that kind of thing, I could see Tank Dell being an absolute steal in the draft, or Nico if he falls far enough. So those are guys that I love the talent and obviously love CJ Stroud. Obviously, Diggs is still good, but you bet on talent at wide receiver. Oftentimes it will work out, and those guys definitely have it.
I love it. It's good answers. Let's dive into some rapid fire questions. Learn a little bit more about you. First, who do you like most, Andy, Mike, or Jason?
Brooks is the answer to that one.
There you go. Which footballer would be most compliant as a physical therapy patient? Like who would do their home exercise plan?
So I can actually already answer this question because they've all three at separate points have reached out to me and said, I injured this playing pickleball or hiking or whatever. Like, what do I do? And none of them have been compliant so far. So I don't even know if I could give you an answer that would say one of them would be compliant. I think it would be 0 for 3.
I love it. I love it. So clinically though, what were your favorite, injuries to encounter in rehab?
Yeah, where I was at, I saw a lot of shoulders, knees, ankles, and then a lot of people coming in with lower back pain or stuff like that. But my favorite injuries to treat were with throwing athletes and the shoulder. So baseball pitchers, volleyball players, stuff like that, where the shoulder is just so complex. I mean, you've got so many factors at play with the lack of inherent stability, the muscular demands that you have to have on it, but also there's such a trickle down effect of your shoulder blade control, your thoracic spine flexibility. And the biggest challenge with all those things is that it's such a give and take. There's no this is the plan, just do this and everything will be fine, because every athlete is different and every recovery is different with those things. That the challenge of that to me was a lot of fun working with those types of athletes.
Yeah, it's a great answer because shoulders are as complex as it gets. What are your favorite hobbies and activities outside of sports?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I've got 2 young girls right now. A lot of my free time goes to them, which is great. I'm also a huge golfer, so I love to play golf. So whenever I can sneak away for a couple hours, I try to play. Admittedly, it's not as much as it used to be for me now that I'm in this phase of life, but love to golf, hang out with my family, doing something active almost every weekend, whether it's taking the dog for a hike or going, with the girls on a long walk, working out myself, just stuff like that. So always trying to stay busy and stay active.
Nice. What's the last TV show that you binged? So
my wife and I are currently watching, it's called The Bear on Hulu. I don't know if anyone has seen that. I'm into it, but also I don't know that I'm ready to sit down for 8 hours and watch the whole thing. So we're watching an episode per night right now with that.
Okay. What's your all-time favorite TV show?
This one to me is an easy answer. It is clearly The Office, which I can relate to on so many levels. For anyone that follows me on Twitter, I feel like 90% of what I put out there is some sort of Michael Scott gif with something that I tweet. So I'm a diehard fan of The Office.
Perfect. What's your all-time favorite movie?
So I like tons of just stupid comedy, or kind of the ones that hit home for me. So one that popped into my head immediately was Dumb and Dumber. I feel like it's one of those classics that not everyone likes. If you're not into that humor, you don't kind of appreciate it, but that's the humor that gets me quite a bit.
I love it. How about a favorite sports movie?
I'm going to go with a chalk answer of Space Jam. As a 90s kid, that movie was everything for me for a while. I'm also a big fan of Angels in the Outfield, for anyone that's seen that. Yeah. So Space Jam is probably my favorite, though.
That's good. That's good. Good answers. Who's your favorite band, artist, musician?
So I'm all over the map, honestly. In high school, I was super into rap. Then I kind of went into this indie punk rock phase, and now I've kind of come back to a mix of everything with some country thrown in there. So I don't even know who I am anymore, honestly. But I don't have a band or a group that I follow religiously that's my favorite. But I like a ton of different stuff, honestly.
That's a totally acceptable answer because, I mean, most people probably just like a variety. So, what are you most grateful for at this time?
Good question. I was thinking about this when you put it in our doc, and I was like, what am I most thankful for? And I would say over the last 3 or 4 years, you get to a certain point, your parents have health issues, your grandparents have health issues, friends that have health issues. And I've, knock on wood, been so fortunate to have a healthy life so far. My wife's healthy, my girls are healthy. So I would say right now, just health is my biggest thing.
And it's a perfect fitting answer from a board certified, physical therapist. I love that.
Chalk answer there.
No, but it's the right answer. I wish more people valued that as their answer because, life's a lot better when you're healthy for sure, especially down the road. Now, obviously, your journey's been, again, a fun thing to witness from my perspective. Can you name some of the people that have had a huge just impact on you during your time in this fantasy sports industry?
Yeah, I think my biggest is my wife, actually, which she, it's so funny because when we were met in college and stuff, she was into sports, but not like I was. But now that this is what I do for work, she's like, we have to watch football again. It's well, it's Thursday. But also in December, we have it on Saturdays and also Sunday and Monday. So it's now this running joke. But she's been so supportive the entire time that when I was on the fence, I was like, it's so risky to leave the clinic. It's kind of what I've done for years, and it's what's provided us a lot of stability, and like that's what I know. But she was the one that really encouraged me to go for it. So I would say she's kind of top of the list as far as that's concerned.
That's awesome. And how about advice for people that want to get more involved in content creation in the fantasy sports industry?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces of advice. One is you've got to just go for it. Don't be afraid of what people think or if they're going to criticize you, because early on, like, no one's great at it, right? You got to kind of like practice and get good at it. It's like anything. You're not great right away, so you got to break the ice, so to speak, and just go for it. And you learn along the way. And I'm a big believer in like learning by doing. So that to me is one step of advice: is if you are on the fence, just go for it. The other thing is, I think, trying to find some uniqueness in the space as it gets watered down over the years. People everyone can write redraft content, right? Everyone wants to write or talk about redraft articles, but like for me, the angle was injuries, and that's obviously unique to kind of what I do in my background. But there's a lot of different avenues, I think, to explore with that. So I think trying to find something unique, like what you're doing with your show and highlighting guests and highlighting the work of the community and like lifting up the community. No one was doing that before, right? Everyone was just trying to compete for their own site or their own podcast. And like yours is just so unique. It's such a fun listen. It's so, refreshing. So trying to find, I think, uniqueness in what you do is really important to help kind of break through.
That's great advice. How about advice for healthcare professionals that want to get into the industry?
Yeah, it's really, I think it's starting to become pretty well covered, but I still think there's space for more. So, what I would advise is trying to, like I talked about earlier, just giving context for people that is easy to understand, but also being willing to admit that there's a range of outcomes on all this stuff. Like, we don't know if a player's out there at 80% or 75%, or if their snaps are going to be limited, like that kind of stuff. And just trying to present those variables to people along the way, I think is really helpful. The other thing is trying to make sure you know who you're talking to, right? So like I find myself sometimes when I'm writing an article or when I do the Injury Blitz podcast, I like want to mention like a specific, nerve or a specific muscle. And it's like, people don't care about that. They just want to know the information. Like, yes or no, is he good? Is he not? Is he playing? So trying to make sure that you kind of give your takes and give your information that, makes you seem smart, of course, but you've got to make sure you understand who you're talking to, almost as if you're talking to a patient, in a way where you explain things that they can understand, not trying to make it so, so specific, because a lot of us don't have the same background, obviously.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think there's a lot of people out there that do, they love their career in healthcare, but they also love fantasy content. And so I can see why people have wanted to dive in and contribute at different sites. And that advice is really good. It's great advice. Matthew, anything else that we haven't covered that you want to share before we close things out?
I don't think so. This was fun, man. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's been good to finally connect, because you and I have talked, I feel like, a bunch over the years on Twitter mostly, but I think this is like our first, air quotes, face-to-face conversation. So it's been fun, man. I'm really appreciative that you brought me on.
No, it's a thrill to have you on here. Tell the listeners and viewers where they can find you.
Yeah, so all my work is with the Fantasy Footballers. Like I said, we've got the Dynasty podcast, the DFS podcast. All my articles are on their site, and then on Twitter, you can find me at the Fantasy PT.
There you go. Follow Matthew Betz. He's been delivering great content for years. I've enjoyed everything that he's done along the way, and you will too, for sure. It was a pleasure having you on here. Can't wait to see what's next for you in 2024. Best of luck, my man.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.